Andrew Dominik's new film Blonde has been divisive to say the least. The film has its defenders, but there are a great many people who actively despise it. A fictionalized portrait of Marilyn Monroe, from her troubled childhood to her eventual death by overdose, Blonde depicts its protagonist's suffering in excruciating detail. Throughout the film, Marilyn is continually brutalized and degraded. It's a film that features child abuse, abortions, and multiple depictions of sexual assault. Many fans of Monroe condemned the film before it had even premiered, on the basis that Marilyn had already been exploited enough, both during her lifetime by the studio heads who foisted a highly sexualized image upon her, and even after her death, once her estate fell into the hands of an intellectual property management company that has only sought to further profit from her image. The idea of yet another piece of media about Monroe, especially a film directed by a man that had enough sexual content to earn it an NC-17 rating in the US, was understandably controversial. Rumours swirled about its salacious content, and the film was decried as pornography and a cynical attempt at using a famous name to make money. Blonde is based on a novel by Joyce Carol Oates, which is a fictionalized account of Monroe's life that features many events that are entirely products of the author's imagination. For many Monroe fans, creating a fictional story based on the life of a real person is tantamount to lying, which, while technically true, is a criticism that could be applied to a pretty significant percentage of the movies, plays, and novels that humanity has ever produced.
This story shall the good man teach his son.
Upon its premiere at the Venice Film Festival, as critics and audiences' reactions came out, it seemed that these Monroe fans' worst fears may well have been realised. Richard Brody wrote for The New Yorker, "The character endures an overwhelming series of relentless torments that, far from arousing fear and pity, reflect a special kind of directorial sadism. In an effort to decry the protagonist's sufferings, Blonde wallows in them." This line of criticism was reflected in many of the film's reviews. Some critics even went as far as to suggest that Andrew Dominik was actively consumed by misogyny, and that he made the film as a deliberate, conscious effort to hurt and punish Marilyn, whom he apparently hates. Which is kind of a wild claim, seeing as Dominik spent over a decade trying to get the film made. He really is a monster in certain people's imaginations. Although Dominik certainly didn't do himself any favours in promoting the film. In one Sight and Sound interview, he spoke disparagingly about some of Monroe's films, notably Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, claiming it depicted its female characters as, and I'm quoting here, whores. It's understandable that many people were left feeling that as a filmmaker, he was not approaching his subject with proper respect. And so, by the time the film eventually reached a wide audience with its Netflix release, it was already under a cloud of controversy. Most people were coming to the film with an acute awareness of the hatred it had already inspired. Blonde reportedly became the platform's most streamed film on its release day, yet viewers' reactions largely seemed to align with critics, with many taking to Twitter to air their grievances with the film. On my first viewing of Blonde, I found the film incredibly tough to take, and I can very much see why people have had these reactions to it. However, I have not been able to stop thinking about it since. After watching the film a second time, I've come to the opinion that Blonde is a masterpiece. In fact, it may well be one of the best films that I've ever seen. Blonde is an incredibly dense text. There's a lot to say about it, and in this video I won't be able to give a fully fleshed out analysis of the film, but I do want to give some partial, incomplete thoughts about why I think Blonde takes the approach it does, what the merits of its approach are, and why I think some of the film's critics, and even some admirers, have misunderstood its intentions. Capturing or constructing an image of a person can, in some ways, be a violent act. An image consists of only one angle of one moment. Everything before or after or off to the side, out of frame, is destroyed. The subject of the image is shaped by the person capturing them. Even the word capture implies a power dynamic. When an image of a person becomes famous or even iconic, it can start to eclipse the person themselves. They are forever being compared to the image, never able to match it. Likewise, telling a story about someone can be a form of violence. The storyteller distorts time and space, breaks apart events and molds them in a way more satisfying to convention, eliminating the messy parts, turning chaos into order, but in doing so annihilating everything that doesn't fit the narrative.
In the movies they chop you all to bits. Cut, cut, cut. It's a jigsaw puzzle. but you're not the one to put the pieces together.
Most of us fear death and desire to find some means of living beyond it, leaving something behind, impacting the world in some lasting way. For some people, having children can be a way to achieve some measure of life after death, although that can lead them to viewing those children as mere extensions of themselves.
The child was her own secret self exposed.
Fame is another means of immortality. If you become famous, hopefully people will remember you for years after your death. If you become a legend, an icon, a myth, maybe they'll remember you for centuries. But of course, the great problem is that nobody is really remembering you because they didn't know you. They're remembering an image of you, a story about you, or perhaps a collection of disparate images and stories, given the illusion of coherence. Turning yourself into an icon, or being shaped into one by others, is a process of having parts of yourself distorted, broken, and destroyed. The thing that lives on after you is something other, maybe something that now seems alien or even monstrous.
Boop boop doo. I wanna be kissed by you, just you, nobody else but you.
Marilyn Monroe was the archetype of a particular kind of femininity, shaped by the demands of a patriarchal culture. The culture demands women to be attractive and sexually available. However, there's a problem. A woman who's attractive and available might have sex with someone other than you, which for many heterosexual men is a very threatening idea. Marilyn solved this problem by managing to be beautiful, sexy, and available, yet paradoxically somehow at the same time innocent and naive, almost as if she was unaware of sex itself. She would stand above a subway grate, not to show off her legs and reveal her underwear, but because she genuinely wanted to feel the cool breeze.
Delicious!
She would behave in a very flirtatious way, but not even realise that's what she was doing. She gave men the titillation they desired, but unlike other famous sex symbols of the era, it didn't feel like she was doing it as a power play, or a manipulation, or a seduction. She was just giving it away for free.
A kiss on the hand may be quite continental, but diamonds are a girl's best friend.
Even when she's playing Lorelei Lee in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, a character who on paper is the archetypal gold digger, who you'd expect to be deeply cynical, cunning and calculating, Monroe plays her with a total transparent purity.
You do wear it on your head.
Her wide eyes and breathy voice have a childlike quality. She often played women who were thoughtless, unreflective, stupid even, so that men could always feel superior to her.
I'm not very bright, I guess.
I wouldn't say that. Careless, maybe.
No, just dumb. If I had any brains, I wouldn't be on this crummy train with this crummy girls' band.
When you're dreaming, everything is unstable. You might be somewhere that looks like nowhere you've ever been before, but somehow you just know that it's your childhood home. The location might even transform from one second to the next. You might walk through a door in an office that leads to the Grand Canyon, or find that the walls simply melt away around you. In dreams, the identities of people are also in flux.
Who are you?
Oh, I'm your husband.
You might see a stranger and understand them to be your uncle. Even your own identity can shift. You might dream that you're an astronaut, or have a nightmare where you know for a fact that you are a murderer. Being a dreamer is, in some ways, like being an actor in a movie. But the role, the other actors, the characters, the location and the plot are constantly unstable, shifting from moment to moment. Blonde is not a biopic or a drama film in any conventional sense. It's not a film that takes place in a recognisable reality where we experience Marilyn Monroe as a three-dimensional, multifaceted character who grows and changes over the course of a story like a normal protagonist. Blonde is a nightmare, both one that Marilyn is having and one that we are having about her.
It's just a dream. It's just a crazy dream.
The protagonist isn't really Marilyn Monroe, or even Norma Jean, the so-called real woman behind her. The protagonist is a fractured dream consciousness that lacks a stable sense of her own selfhood and is desperately trying to cling on to some kind of identity or connection.
I think I am Nell. She's a sleepwalker. Where does dreaming and a madness begin?
Stylistically, the film is constantly switching between colour and black and white, utilising different aspect ratios, using slow motion, high shutter speeds, montages of still photos, night vision photography. This reflects the multiplicity of images that were made about the real Monroe.
What kind of a wedding you going to have?
very quiet, I hope.
Famous images are recreated almost identically, so what we see on screen is almost like a photograph that's come to life. Indeed, sometimes we do literally see photographs of her come to life. Every time the film transitions from scene to scene, we hear the sound of the next location before we see it. These sounds often have a disturbing, surreal effect, and often Monroe seems to be hearing them herself.
Did somebody die? What is all this?
Both her and the audience are being dragged through time, shoved into different roles, different images, different parts of the dream. It's as though every time Monroe was filmed or photographed, every time a story was told about her, or every time a rumour was invented, every time some version of her was locked into a person's memory, some small part of her soul was captured. Her spirit now haunts each of these images, like how a ghost haunts a house in a horror movie. Now we are experiencing all of the fragments of Monroe, from all of the images and memories of her, trying to stitch themselves back together. Ana de Armas gives an extraordinary performance. She captures Monroe's vulnerability and sincerity perfectly, yet something about her accent and her look is just a little off. Her vividly hazel green eyes have been changed to match Monroe's distinctive shade of powder blue, and while the effects work is incredible, it's still just a little uncanny, and so you feel aware of the gap between character and actor. Yet instead of creating a layer of pretense, this only adds to the film's eeriness. Marilyn Monroe, the icon, the idealized image of femininity that persists in the cultural imagination, is at times like some kind of eldritch, malevolent spirit that must be conjured to possess both character and actress. One of the film's best and most haunting shots sees Monroe's face pasted onto de Armas through CGI, and the mask gradually, almost imperceptibly slips away as we get closer and closer. A common nightmare I have is that there's something terribly wrong happening, and I can't get anyone around me to understand or even recognise that fact. Even the people who are supposed to care about me most seem indifferent. This film captures that specific feeling better than any other I've ever seen. It's true that this film excludes many aspects of Monroe's life: her opposition to McCarthyism, her support of civil rights, her friendships with women, and it obscures Monroe's achievements as an artist. Yet in our nightmares, our victories are rarely present. Monroe seems out of her depth, or somewhat uncomprehending for much of the movie, but that less seems like a commentary on her as a person, and more communicating the dreamlike anxiety of constantly being plunged into unfamiliar situations. It's also true that some of the traumatic events that happen to Marilyn, the character in the film, are fictionalized, or at the very least speculative. They more than likely did not happen to the real woman. I think the film draws heavily from both contemporary gossip column rumours, as well as the myths and ideas that various authors have projected onto Monroe since her death, because the dream consciousness who is the protagonist of this film is trapped within a nightmare version of the cultural perception of Monroe, rather than her real life. I should also say that I don't think Blonde's protagonist is merely a cipher, a storytelling tool used to explore ideas, someone we aren't supposed to empathise with. In fact, the criticism that the film is cruel and lacks empathy for its main character is by far the most wrong-headed that I've heard. I actually think that the opposite is the case. The film demands total empathy from us. We are constantly being made to feel exactly what the character is feeling, often in very vivid, visceral ways. Right at the start, we are thrust into the point of view of a child who is being abused horribly by her mother. These scenes are so intense, so well acted, with possibly the greatest child performance that I've ever seen. What the film is asking us to feel is so upsetting that I feel like a lot of audience members and critics just closed themselves off to it, told themselves that it was only a film, and resented the director for trying to make them feel this way. Basically, all films require sympathetic audiences. Once you've closed yourself off to a film, it's generally very hard for it to win you back. I think that the cruelty and lack of empathy that many people felt the film was showing was simply reflective of their own emotional responses once they had reached this state. Blonde's fractured approach to storytelling doesn't just reflect its themes, it also approximates its protagonist's own mental illness. Marilyn Monroe was widely speculated to have borderline personality disorder. People with BPD often experience an unstable sense of self and struggle to get their emotional needs met through their relationships with others. The sense of both Marilyn and the audience being dragged through time into unfamiliar situations both approximates a dream state, and also the sense of dissociation that many people with mental illness often face. Blonde is unique in its lack of triumph or even catharsis. It's about a person who struggles and struggles, and ultimately, it isn't enough. Unlike other films about troubled artists that claim it was at least all worth it because the work will live on, Blonde denies us even that. For some people that will seem too bleak a message, or it might seem irresponsible even, as though the film is portraying mentally ill people as all inevitably doomed. I absolutely don't think that the film is making that kind of blanket statement about all people with mental illness, but it does accurately convey the extent to which people at moments of crisis can feel like there is no hope. I feel like it's important that art honestly reflects to us that there isn't an escape for everybody, but that doesn't mean that it's claiming that there isn't one for anybody. Blonde also contains scenes that some feel carry a pro-life agenda. Marilyn decides to have an abortion at one point, then later in the film she is pregnant again, and her unborn fetus claims to be the same baby that died previously and guilt trips her about the decision.
You won't hurt me this time, will you? Not do what you did the last time?
Christian conservatives often produce horrifying propaganda to influence women not to have abortions, and critics have claimed that the events depicted in Blonde resemble this kind of far-right Christian propaganda. However, I do think the film's politics are fundamentally pro-choice.
My mind's my own to change.
Prior to the abortion scene, Marilyn changes her mind. She is then forced to go through with the procedure without her consent by doctors and employees of the studio so that she can star in an upcoming movie. Forcing someone to have an abortion is just as clearly a violation of their body and right to choose as denying one to them. But in the classic Hollywood era, numerous actresses were directly forced by studios into getting abortions for their careers. In Blonde, Marilyn clearly sees her unborn children as extensions or reflections of her own inner vulnerability.
We were so poor, this drawer was your crib. But it was good enough for us, wasn't it?
She wants to go back in time to save herself from her mother's abuse and her father's abandonment.
You did the right thing. You had your baby.
But she is also terrified of reenacting those same cycles of violence and neglect.
You had me.
Just as the studio system foists a sexualized image upon her, Marilyn also finds that the men she knows romantically demand that she conform to their image of womanhood.
I could call you my Magda.
Joe DiMaggio, Marilyn's second husband, is deeply conservative and wants her to be a housewife and mother. Most of all, he wants her to be sexually pure. Likewise, throughout the film we hear letters from a man claiming to be Monroe's father, who also wants to foist a modest, conservative form of femininity upon his daughter. When Marilyn fails to live up to these men's expectations, we hear one shame her whilst the other beats her.
Your crude likeness posed with your dress lifted up for all the world to see your private parts.
Both men are revealed as insecure, brutal, and cruel. Given all of this, in the now infamous scene when Marilyn is confronted by her fetus, I don't think it's at all accurate or fair to claim that the film is inviting us to judge her for having had an abortion. To me, the baby's voice comes across as deeply insidious and sinister. What it says is clearly factually incorrect, vile, and manipulative.
I didn't mean to.
Yes, you meant to. It was your decision.
The baby is a manifestation of internalized misogyny and guilt. Blonde often confronts us with idyllic imagery that's so overwhelmingly kitschy that it becomes grotesque and disturbing. The way the scene is filmed and the way the CGI baby is rendered is clearly another example of this. However, critics have, I think wrongly, taken these scenes at face value and assumed that the kitschiness was unintentional. The sequence may superficially resemble certain aspects of right-wing propaganda, but the film consistently critiques the pernicious ideas that underpin such propaganda throughout its runtime. There's a great deal more to be discussed about Blonde. As I said, these are only really some initial thoughts and attempts to defend the film from some of the criticisms it's received. To me, it's one of those rare films where after your first viewing, you know it's going to be part of your life from now on, and you've only just started your journey with it. I felt that way about much of Andrew Dominik's filmography. Blonde is something of a sister film to Dominik's earlier masterpiece, The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which I am totally obsessed with. I've been working on a video essay about it for almost a year now, and it will end up being an incredibly long and in-depth analysis. If you're a deranged maniac and that sounds like the kind of thing you'd be interested in, please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you again at some point in the next 6 months or so.